Hello everyone and welcome back to Brickcats. Today I am featuring RichBoyJhae's Republic Gunship, or Low Altitude Attack Transport Infantry. As always, please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, leaving a comment, or supporting what I do in any other way you see fit. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for choosing to spend some of your time with me today, and for recently helping me reach 800 subscribers. This is the Clone Wars variant, which has the sealed troop compartment doors, but there is an episode 2 as well as a muleless version available. Instructions are available directly from the designer and cost $25 for one model, $30 for two, or $35 for all three. Contact information may be found in the description of RichBoyJhae's video, linked in the description. A couple of notes right up front. The designer has helpfully marked all the parts that are hidden in red in the parts list, and the README file instructs you to change these parts colors to not applicable in Bricklink in the wanted list, so the algorithm knows that it should select the cheapest color available. Doing that, but without any substitutions for the ship and stand, Bricklink gave me 5 stores and $394 before shipping and tax, or about $430 including shipping and tax. Yes, this is quite expensive, and yes, buying from Pick-a-Brick helps immensely, so make sure you watch the parts section if you want to find out how to reduce that price. And RichBoyJhae does mention right up front that you will save a bunch of money using Pick-a-Brick. In my reviews, I offer my opinions on aesthetics and model features, parts issues you might want to look out for, the build experience, the model's integrity, and I close out with my overall impression and pricing information in the conclusion. If you're watching this review, I assume you bought the instructions or are interested in buying them. I also assume a basic level of familiarity with Bricklink's ordering system and with LEGO nomenclature. I always use genuine LEGO bricks, and I always purchase the instructions. I create these reviews for my own personal enjoyment and in the hopes that my advice will make your experience more enjoyable and or less expensive. The Republic Gunship measures about 17 inches long by 19 inches wide and tops out at 11 inches when it's on the stand, and this is about 6.5 inches when it's off the stand. As you can see, the exterior is nearly completely studless, which itself is an incredible achievement. And I know in his video, again linked in the description below, the designer does state that there are 0 exposed studs. However, I did find 4, and there are 2 each on these cockpit pieces. This is certainly nitpicking, and the designer's point is that literally everywhere else the studs are covered. And let me tell you, it was really impressive to see that in person. I know there are many schools of thought on the right balance between studs and studless, and I personally like to see a few studs here and there, whether it be for texture or just because using a piece with studs in a particular section makes sense or adds some stability. But the studless nature of this model, however, in my opinion, is more of a testament to the designer's skill than any real necessity. The front of the cockpit is about 4 studs wide, and as you'd expect, there's a lot going on here with slopes connected at various angles and the cannon wells underneath. These cannons do have a limited range of motion. This is kind of a sensitive part, and so I'm not going to move them too much, but of course these ball turrets do rotate. The cockpits fit minifigures comfortably, and each of them has a minimal representation of a control panel here. In my opinion, due to the display nature of this model, the interior of the cockpit at least is not something most people are going to care about, so I'm totally fine with just very simple instrument panel representation. The rear cockpit has the cabin accurate red stripe across the top, and the sides are filled in with these windscreen pieces and these trans-clear cheese slopes. There are very small gaps on either side of the cheese slopes, certainly excusable. You could cover this up with a 1x4 trans-clear tile, but that would also make the cockpit look a little too bulky in my opinion, or too fat this way. So certainly a reasonable omission here. These sections on the side have some nice angles. The designer's video highlights how these panels steadily creep upwards, which indeed does look very good. And there are connection points represented by these 2x2 dishes for the light pieces or the light attachments we see in some of the Clone Wars episodes. The battle on Umbara comes to mind. There are no instructions included for those light pieces, but you can probably make your own pretty easily. In this area just behind, you do see some fairly large gaps, and these gaps are not present in the designer video, so clearly this is something that I did wrong. I'm not really sure what. I will say that overall these sub-assemblies do fit together pretty well, and I feel like when I was building this I didn't have these gaps, so maybe they opened up as the model flexed or something like that. And I did try to fix these a little bit before I kind of just gave up. I'm honestly not quite sure what's wrong here. It seems like the main problem is between the hull here and this door, which I can't really eliminate despite my best efforts. You can see that this is all one subassembly, and it kind of moves on its connection point. Either way, I'm not losing sleep over it, and if you just turn it to the side, it doesn't really look too bad, or it's not as noticeable at least. The doors are of course divided into the forward and rear section, and there's some very accurate shaping with regard to where they split. They swing on a Technic axle mechanism, and this can droop a bit when you're opening it up, which means that you do need to do a little bit of jiggling to get the doors back in place once you do open them up. The window sections are nicely filled with these light bluish gray subassemblies, and these are kind of a pain to put together. I'll get to that later, but they really look good from the outside when you're done, as they're slightly recessed inside these gaps, and it just looks really clean overall. Inside the troop or cargo area, there are a couple of studs you can use to attach minifigures if you want to, and I really like the antenna and zipline pieces RichBoyJhae used for the handholds over the top here. There is a rear ramp with enough friction to stay in place without a pin or anything like that. You can see I can kind of open it, it just stays there, so that's really nice. And to me, the most impressive part about this entire model is how empty the troop bay is. There's no central support here. It extends maybe 6 studs or so this way, a little difficult to see, but I'll try and turn it here. The point is there's a lot of room in there, and this whole space is just huge, and it's freestanding essentially. And when you put this down on the ground, there's no smooshing or anything like that. You don't detect any motion of this entire thing being compressed. So for some reason, it's really strong, and therefore that part was really impressive to me. So very well done. The Republic insignia is studded on, and this is probably my least favorite detail of the model, just because it seems a lot less clever than pretty much everything else. But, you know, it works. It's not in the designer video, so perhaps this was a late addition or something like that. But it does have the somewhat added benefit of covering up some of the gaps or connections in this general area. The spine of the gunship was probably one of my favorite parts to build, and this is just because of how it gets built. It's a really kind of crazy subassembly, and it just slides in really nicely once you're finished. You just kind of drop it in here and secure it with a Technic axle down here. Very cool. And these round plates at the top also make up part of the light bluish gray pattern at the top, which continues into this brick built section. The rockets are represented with candle pieces and unicorn horns, and they are set in place, so there's no motion possible with these. To the rear of the rockets, you see this lime green stripe, and this is pretty much constructed perfectly to match the film models. The rocket launchers utilize a number of interesting pieces to fill out the shape, including black life rings back here for these vent sections, and a number of cheese slopes and angled tiles to make this elongated cone towards the front. And then these 45-degree cut slopes to make the rounded shape. The rocket launchers look pretty good to me, and the construction allows the designer to represent the color scheme really accurately, and in addition, the taper is more or less correct. LEGO doesn't make a cone that is shallow enough to get this shape quite right, and so using these angled tiles and the G-slopes, it works out pretty well. And another cool part about this, it's kind of difficult to see, but in all of the craziness on the rocket launcher, he still manages to secure it in multiple places. So there's a couple connections back here, but also this is a Technic brick right here, and a stud goes into it, so it's a little loose at the moment, but I You might have seen it pop in there, so there is a connection right there, which I just thought was a really cool thing, just because these are very different sections built at different times, and at the end it all kind of comes together. The wings are very impressive as well, and my favorite part here is this little vent on the front of this leading edge here. I'm not aware of any other model, LEGO or official LEGO or otherwise, that includes this vent. And usually this is just a curved wedge piece that designers use to cover up that little section there. On the rest of the wing, the designer has done an amazing job with the dark red color scheme, the red stripe on the end of the wings. And if you just take a look, there's lots of just weird angles that come together in a really nice way here. And this wing is actually reasonably stable as well. The wingtip cannons are accurately represented with the transclear hemisphere and this light bluish gray hemisphere behind. This construction is a little loose, which is why you can see these gaps here, and I'll revisit this in the model integrity section. And on the underside, I'll throw up a picture just because I don't want to turn this over, but there are some rockets underneath the wing right about here. Finally, the rear of the gunship has this impressive exhaust vent section that looks amazing. It's complete with the pearl gold piping. And the vents themselves are minifigure skis surrounded by tiles and ingot pieces. The rear cannon, which is fixed in place, finishes up the tour of the model here, along with the light bluish gray color scheme continued on the back. Instructions for both the simple stand you see here, and there is a Geonosis stand with some reddish brown and dark orange highlights are also included when you buy the instructions. The stand holds the gunship at a slight forward angle, like it's taking off. The stand looks really good, and most importantly, it's very stable. The model is held on pretty securely with these two Technic pins that insert into the two holes of the gunship's floor, and since they're axle connections going into Technic holes, it means it's pretty easy to lift off. This gunship is really impressive in person, and it has some serious desk presence. It's the largest of the 3 gunships I built, and fans of the gunship will appreciate the lengths RichBoyJhae went to in order to recreate just the smallest details. And experienced builders will appreciate the complexity of the build required to make the exterior studless. RichBoyJhae's gunship with the plain stand requires 404 elements and 3,564 pieces. Like I mentioned in the introduction, the designer has very helpfully distinguished the pieces that are hidden and thus can be any color in the parts list by marking them as red. You should change them to either not applicable as in the README file, or if you're planning on building up your collection of spare parts, should you disassemble this in the future, you could generally go with a useful color like light bluish gray, dark bluish gray, white, or black. Also, some of the parts specified in red in the parts list don't exist in red, so you do need to change at least those for the following element. Change the colors for the following elements, rather. The parts list calls for 2 antenna small lever part 4593 in black. This is much more commonly found in the antenna small base with black lever assembly, which is Bricklink part number 4592C02. The black or light bluish gray variations are the most common, and it doesn't matter because you're only using the lever part, and this may help you reduce your store count. However, my recommendation is to eliminate this element altogether and increase the quantity of the bar 1L with claw, part 48729B in dark bluish gray from 2 to 6, and I'll show you why in the build experience section. In short, these are used to hold these hemispheres in place, and I did not find that the antenna was very effective. The 2 Technic axle 1L with pin without friction ridges specified in light bluish gray, part 3749. These connect the door. Let's see. These connect the arm to the door here in the front. And this piece is very expensive in light bluish gray, so I recommend changing it to light gray, which is more common. And the most common color for this piece is tan, so you could even go with that if the color doesn't matter to you as much. Personally, I mean, I had some light gray, so I used light gray, but I don't think tan is going to be very noticeable. The door is going to be closed most of the time anyway. The 4 minifigure ingots in metallic silver, part 99563, go right here. And these can be randomly very expensive, so as always, you should be checking each individual store the algorithm suggests to you to make sure you aren't being charged high prices for pieces that would otherwise be inexpensive. These consistently showed up over $1 each in my search results, and they are much less expensive directly from LEGO. Same story for the 4 2x4 tiles in metallic silver, part 87079. You can see these on either side of the ski pieces. These are often over $2 in my algorithm results when they are 60 cents directly from LEGO. Alternatively, while these two elements do look great in metallic silver, light bluish gray is much more common and will still look just fine. This is pretty much not relevant if you're ordering directly from LEGO, but if you're bricklinking it and notice that these elements are disproportionately expensive, try switching them to light bluish gray. One really nice thing about RichBoyJhae's Gunship is that there really aren't any extremely rare or expensive pieces in the build. I think these metallic silver elements were just kind of the exception. I also don't know why this seems to be coming undone, but whatever. The main reason that this model is on the pricier side is just due to the quantity of elements required, as well as usage of several newer elements that aren't widely available yet on Bricklink. Luckily, LEGO's Pick-a-Brick has most of the newer elements in stock, and making extensive use of Pick-a-Brick is the best way to reduce both your store count and the overall cost of building this model. I really need to make a separate video on why Pick-a-Brick is an amazing source for LEGO mock builders and link to it each time I go through the speech again. But suffice it to say, the following is a list of elements that in my opinion are best off purchased directly from LEGO. As a reminder, orders over $35 ship for free, and the handling fees on bestseller and standard elements are waived if you spend over $14 in each category. With this model, meeting those thresholds will not be a problem, and I marked some of the pieces with an asterisk that were not available from Pick-a-Brick in mid-December 2022 when I'm filming this review, and availability changes fairly often, so it's worth checking back, and they may be available when you want to buy them. And while the previous list contains pieces I think you should definitely order from Pick-a-Brick, the more you buy directly from LEGO, the more you're likely to save on this model. I use a Chrome web extension called Brick Hunter that takes a lot of the manual entry out of ordering from Pick-a-Brick from large mocks, and I'm planning on doing a video on this extension soon. But if you want to try it out for yourself, it's not too difficult to use. The short version is that the extension will download the prices for elements in a Bricklink wanted list and automatically add all the available elements in the specified quantities to your Pick-a-Brick cart, and it's actually amazing. Instructions for RichBoyJhae's Gunship contain 1,575 steps, and each part or subassembly you add in the step is outlined in bright green. Against the orange background, this generally works out well, and it's also probably a better contrast against the dark red sections than the red outline would be. In all, I think this model took me about 16 hours to build, and as usual, it was not all in one sitting. And just due to how I bought the pieces, there was some pre-sorting by default, so I do think it's useful to separate out the pieces that you have in larger quantities, like the 1x1 plates and the Technic bricks. For some reason, I find white pieces a lot harder to differentiate in a big pile than other colors, so having it all in the big pile wasn't the most convenient way to do it. For the stand, the plain stand anyway, the instructions contain 61 steps with the same green outline. I built the stand first thinking it would be a nice place to put the model once I finished a significant portion of it, but the model actually starts out fairly front heavy, and as a result it doesn't sit on the stand well until you've added a fair bit onto the back of the model to counterbalance it. The subassembly that provides that counterbalance is, in my opinion, the exhaust vents, and that starts at step 539. I have a lot of trouble with the exhaust vents, and it's not because the instructions weren't clear or anything. There are just a lot of kind of tenuous connections that have lots of ways to move around and move out of place, and there's not really a good way to support the entire thing all at once when you're building it. I will say that once you do finish it and you get to drop it in, it is really cool how this all fits perfectly. I guess that's just LEGO in general, but it was very impressive just how difficult this part was to keep together before you can drop it in. And the last area I found a bit frustrating were the doors, specifically linking the top section of the doors to the bottom. And the reason it takes a little bit of patience is that the filler assemblies, these gray parts, they aren't held in place with a stud connection. So especially on the rear doors where there are four of these little gaps to fill, it's really finicky to get everything to line up so you can connect the top section. So, while I have this here, I will show you. This is what I mean when it's difficult to get the door assemblies together, and that's exemplified when they come apart unintentionally. So you see that these are not studded in, they're just held in place by the empty spaces in the arches here. And so when you're trying to connect the top to the bottom, it's quite difficult to both align them such that all the pieces stay together, as well as make them slide into place at the correct angle so you get the right look. This was really not fun when I was building it, and it's still not fun now. There. Kind of. Okay. So that's that. The steps themselves are generally very clear, and for several of the complicated sections that require specific connections or orientations that are otherwise out of the ordinary, the designer has taken time to include different viewing angles, such as step 869. There are also a number of helpful notes scattered throughout, such as in step 219, and I always appreciate when designers clearly take the extra effort to point these things out, as they can save a lot of time and frustration when you're building it. For the stand, I believe there are small errors in step 45 and 56. In step 45, the 3L pin the arrow is pointing at can't go in this position, as that technical is already occupied by the pin you put in place in step 42. And the extra 3L Technic pin left over from correcting step 46 should be installed directly opposite the 3L pin in step 51, otherwise the outer lift arm in step 56 doesn't have a pin holding it in place. This gunship is primarily a display model, but it handles surprisingly well for the level of complexity it has. Some notable weak areas are these plate and tile assemblies under the front cannons here, which are only connected with a lone hollow stud, and these fall off all the time for me. The front cannons themselves are a bar connection, and they come off pretty easily. Usually what happens is I'm trying to move this, and I bump one or both of these, and they both come off. But luckily it's not too big of a deal to put these back in place. The hemisphere pieces on the wingtip turrets, with or without my mod, are still prone to falling off here and there. I basically had no luck with jamming that antenna piece in here to hold them in place. The red stripe of the wings can also come off fairly easily, as it's only held on by one stud connection, but both of these are pretty easy to put back on. Like you saw a little earlier, there can be some uncomfortable flexing in the various sections, like the side panels here, and the main part of the fuselage. And again, the doors are a bit of a challenge to manipulate, as you kind of would expect. There's not a whole lot of room for error here. And occasionally, if you try and adjust the angle of the doors if they've gotten out of alignment, for example, this angle here, it can come apart, and like I said, it's just a little bit of a adventure to get it back together, but not too bad. And it's nothing that you haven't done before by this point. So overall, you do have to handle this model with a bit of care. When I'm picking this up, I'm not going to do it here, but if you use both hands, the bottom and the back are reasonably sturdy. And then putting it back on the stand, until you get the hang of this, I usually open up one of the doors so you can see one or both of the doors, so you can see when you've got these pins in place. Otherwise, you're just kind of like shifting this around, and it's the longer you're holding this thing off the stand, in my opinion, the more nerve-wracking it is. So picking it up by the stand is usually what I do. So if you just put your hand under here, the top part of the stand is actually a pretty good place to hold it, and you can lift it up with one hand like this. Limited swishability, but this is really heavy, and like I said, there's not really a great stable place to grab onto it, so I probably wouldn't do that. RichBoyJhae's Gunship is an amazing model, and the builder's skill is on display in pretty much every assembly or subsection. It's an impressive display piece that will look incredible in a mock setting or simply sitting on its stand. The instructions are generally very good, and while difficult to build, most experienced builders shouldn't have any trouble following the instructions. Without any changes aside from changing the parts in red to not applicable for the color, Bricklink gave me 5 stores and $394 before shipping and tax, or about $430 including shipping and tax. Buying only the 30 or so elements in the part section I recommended from Pick-a-Brick, my Pick-a-Brick total was about $80, which included tax but no shipping costs as I met the free shipping minimum, and my Bricklink results after that were 4 stores and $251 without shipping and tax, or about $292 with shipping and tax. The grand total was then $372. If you buy as many pieces from Pick-a-Brick as are currently available, my Pick-a-Brick cart came out to $286, which included tax, but shipping was free again. To buy the remaining pieces off of Bricklink, the algorithm gave me 3 stores and $38 before shipping and tax, or about $59 including shipping and tax. The grand total was therefore about $345. Like I said in the introduction, the instructions for this model cost $25 for one, $30 for two, or $35 for all 3 variants. You can get them by contacting RichBoyJhae directly with the email address in the description of his overview video, which again is linked in the description. Thanks as always for watching my review of RichBoyJhae's Republic Gunship. If you built the model, you have something to share that I left out, or have a question about something I didn't cover, please leave them below in the comments. At this point, I have reviewed all of the big 3 gunships, that's Brickvault's, RichBoyJhae's, and Bowsker and Nanorex's. Let me know your thoughts on which one you like best. And remember to leave the video a like, subscribe to the channel, or follow me on Instagram if you haven't already. I hope to see you back next time.